Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Amaro Grassi. I am the coordinator of the Board of Public Policy Analysis of the Getulio Vargas Foundation, FGV DAPP, and it's a pleasure to have you all today for the event to the 2022 elections and disinformation in Brazil, organized by DAPP DAPP with the support of the Embassy of Germany in Brazil and the project Digital Democracy, Digitalization, and the Public Power in Brazil. We have here the second debate round of the day with the topic Freedom of Expression and Hate Speech, which gives sequence to the debate carried out in the morning today about freedom of expression and fight against disinformation with the presence of the Justice of the Supreme Court, Alexandre de Moraes. For those of you who weren't able to follow, the morning roundtable is available fully at the YouTube FGV channel. Before continuing the event and passing the floor to our guests, I would like to invite Michael Westland, the representative of the Embassy of Germany in Brazil, who is ahead of the program Rule of Law and Democracy, organized by the Embassy in Brazil, so that he can do a brief introduction to our event. Michael, welcome, and the floor is yours. Good afternoon. I would like to greet you cordially and welcome you to the afternoon session. This is another event that we are carrying out in partnership with FGV, as Amaro already mentioned. I represent the Embassy of Germany in Brazil. We have a series of projects about rule of law and democracy, and here we are discussing the future of rule of law in Latin America, Brazil, and in Europe, most specifically in Germany. In our panel about Europe, we could see the challenges that the democracy faces today all over the world. We do not discuss about social media, but today has a very similar function as the traditional media. Social media can disclose many lies. Social media is dominated by big corporations, companies like Google, Facebook, and here we're discussing to what extent we should not introduce a moderation of the content of those social media and adopt other measures to supervise them. With this panel, we would like to contribute to an improvement of the legal mechanisms without harming freedom of expression. I hope this afternoon is interesting for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Now I pass the floor to our four guests. First, I will briefly introduce them. Marcio Black is a political scientist, cultural producer, and the coordinator of the Program of Democracy and Active Citizenship of the Setubal Foundation. Marcio is a doctor of political sciences by University of São Paulo, specialized in public policies with focus on public security at the University of Zurich. He coordinates the program Democracy and Active Citizenship since January 2020. We also have here Maurício Mussi, who is in charge of the area of institutional affairs of Votorantim S.A., and he's one of the creators of the program Citizenship at Votorantim. He has a degree in law with MBA in Brazilian economy and masters in public management. He's responsible for the political sustainability in the 7 companies that belong to the holding. Thomas Traumann is a journalist and executive coordinator of the MBA in Digital Communication Strategies organized by FGV DAPP, besides being a columnist at the Veja magazine and former Minister of Social Communication, and he is also a colleague of ours at our work. And Danielle Sanches, a researcher of FGV DAPP, she's also our colleague. She's a doctor in History of Sciences at the School of High Studies in social sciences, which is a co-responsibility of the Osvaldo Cruz Foundation, and currently she develops studies in the algorithm culture and the social practices. Before passing the floor to you, I would like to remind you that the manifestations expressed by members of the staff of Getulio Vargas Foundation and guests that participate in our event and online broadcasts represent exclusively the opinion of their authors and not necessarily the institutional position of FGV. I would like to reiterate that everybody who is here agreed to participate spontaneously in this event, and they allow the use of their image for this broadcast, which will be made available afterwards in the official channels of FGV. The participants will have 15 minutes for their initial speeches, followed by questions submitted by the audience through the comment section on YouTube, or the channels that the event is being broadcast on. So I would like to introduce for discussion a topic for debate, recovering some of the very strong concepts that were used this morning by Justice Alexandre de Moraes. Justice Alexandre de Moraes will be heading the electoral court in the 2022 elections. And he was also conducting in the Supreme Court the inquiry of fake news that was very famous last week, with a series of actions connected to this investigation, which characterized social media today as, between quotation marks, no man's land, an impune arena that allows digital attacks and guerrilla like actions. He mentioned this term when he was commenting on the justice systems and its representatives. But what I would like to pose for reflection here is what this means for the citizens in general, for the users of social media and the users of internet in general, and also the most vulnerable and more marginalized groups that sometimes find a very hostile environment, which is likely to carry out violence and violation of rights. This is the general topic. Of course, each guest will be free to talk about their perspective on this main topic. So I would like to invite now Marcio to talk a little bit about his experience heading the project Democracy and Active Citizenship of the Setubal Foundation. And then we can deepen the discussion from the first interventions. Thank you very much, Marcio. Welcome. Thank you. Actually, this is a challenge. We always complain when we are the last one to speak, but it is also a challenge when we are the first one to speak. Even more so with such a strong group of people. We have great challenges right now. I'm going to start with that. I have talked to many people so that we can try to understand the real size of this challenge. When we are dialoguing in our field, which would be more left wing people or more progressive people in the field of sociology and politics, we get to a diagnosis that the categories created by sociology and philosophy and the human sciences in general in the 19th century are the categories that consolidated the political spectrum that we have. The categories of right, left, liberal, conservative, communism, socialism. These are solid categories that persevere throughout time. On the other hand, what we have that goes beyond the discussion between freedom of expression and freedom of press is a machine of content production that creates distortions and is able to forge an idea of a country, to falsify an idea of a country. I always remember George Orwell in 1984 when he said that an absolute dictatorship has some slogans Those that control the past control the future. Those that control the present control the past. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. So when he mentions these quotes in a dystopia, which is what we are living today actually, he tries to problematize and raise questions on the role of information inside a democracy. We understand that a democracy needs information of quality circulating in public. In a democracy, it is essential for people to be able to speak freely. When we talk about freedom of expression, at the end of the day, we're talking about this, and we can summarize this in the sense that the concept of what we call a freedom of expression today was consolidated in the 19th century somehow. So these are the dilemmas that we live. How can we update and adapt all of this structure, which is what supports our democracy today? Freedom of expression, we could consider that is how the society works and how the manifestation of the right of a person that wants to speak their mind. So, freedom of expression and freedom of press based on this concept today pose a problem because it comes from the assumption that knowledge is a virtue and the human nature is prone to speaking the truth. Once this person is touched by the truth, they cannot handle the truth in another way if not disclosing it. Today, we are not talking about such a clear truth anymore. Today, we have distortions of the reality. What we see the most today is the creation of parallel realities, actually. We are confronted by this since the Holocaust, since the Second World War. And this also was reflected in Brazil. Having said that, we need to understand that there are issues today that need to be updated. When we discuss freedom of expression, sometimes we mistake what is freedom of expression and what is freedom of press. The speed of things changed. We lost the notion of what is the public space and how the public space is manifested. Michael, when he talked about the legal framework, that is a very important point. Today we talk about freedom of expression, but we cannot distinguish it from freedom of press. When we talk about freedom of press today, we kind of missed this notion of where the public space is, where ideas need to be debated, and which are the means that bring these ideas to us. Today we have Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Parler, which are means, but we don't know if they're means or if they are the public space itself. I think that we have a big problem to solve. This is a problem that needs to be solved institutionally. We have tried at the Setubal Foundation to understand and create tools to deal with those realities. In 2018, we had a survey on conservatism, on the mindset of the average conservative person, to try to understand this kind of positioning and stance. And we found that the conservative person is pretty much aligned to a kind of politics, to a kind of conservative politics. Today, we understand that freedom of expression gives voice to the intolerance. This isn't a very common issue In the liberal theory of Popper, he talks about the paradox of intolerance. So, to what extent we can tolerate the intolerant? What capacity does the intolerance has of absorbing the intolerant speeches? There is a limit to that. When we talk about the way that the conservative mindset manifests until today, we find some ways, we find some answers, but we also understand that new problems can be caused. In order not to take much of your time and so that we can come back to this conversation, especially when it comes to the manifestations of the hate speech, today we have some very visible solutions. The first one is through law. We have to create regulatory frameworks for the freedom of expression and the freedom of press. We have to outline those public spaces regarding the platforms, regarding what is a public space per se, and how we can regulate the traffic of information in those public spaces. Today, we don't know how to tell if Felipe Neto, a YouTuber in Brazil, if he is a means, if he is a vehicle of communication, or if he is an entity or an individual that is manifesting in a public space. Today, we have trouble identifying this sort of thing and dealing with this sort of thing. And then we feel the impact of what he says and we kind of get a little lost. Something else we need to understand is that there are urgencies that are happening today and that need to be worked on, like attacks to institutions, political violence against parliament members that were elected. These are facts that are happening today and we need to deal with them. But at the foundation, we also understand that the way that the product of freedom of expression today is completely aligned with the institutions that we have today. Both the institution and the products of freedom of expression, they are an expression of the Brazilian society today. The Brazilian society is very unequal. This can happen all over the world, but I'm going to focus on Brazil, which is where we are right now. This inequality happens all over the world, also in Brazil, and this inequality in access also generates an inequality when you can access this public space. The free idea trade, as Stuart Lewis would used to say. When you debate ideas, you notice that these structural inequalities come from way back. So there's inequality of access to institutions, access to income, access to the educational mechanism, and all of this generates an unequal access to the public space when you want to take part in any kind of debate. People sometimes cannot understand each other because of the type of vocabulary that they use. Today, if you look at discussions against racism or on the LGBTQ plus agenda, these are discussions that have a certain vocabulary and a certain language that not all people today can understand. These are groups that are very complex. But when we take this debate to the public space, there is a cognitive toll that you have to pay. So you have to wonder, what is my capacity to understand the terms and the words and the issues that are being discussed here so that I can debate and defend my position on them? This debate is placed on the public space asymmetrically. So this inequality to access the debate creates misunderstandings and what I call lexical asymmetry. In summary, what I would like to say is People are not going to orient themselves through magic. We have to understand that in order to overcome this inequality in access to the debate, we need about 20 years of public policies. At the Setubal Foundation in our democracy program, we are trying to achieve that. How we can qualify people more equally. There is an educational role, but there is also a training of those people ideologically. And I'm not going to defend one or another ideology. We are not underestimating the capacity of people to access the public space. But what we can understand is that accessing this space for debate demands some abilities. So we train them to access those spaces. We try to create a democratic institutionalism so that they can start the discussion and we can focus on the strengthening of the democratic institutions from the training of the individuals so that they can have a sustainable democratic life in all parts of their lives, and we can train those individuals in the context where they are inserted. So we are working on having the schools qualify people that are more able to be in the public debates regardless the type of community that you're in. So the more equal the access to information and institutions, the more equal are going to be those institutions per se. So the debate is on how we can requalify and redemocratize all of our institutions. We are talking, of course, about years and years of corrosion of these institutions. So we have some challenges, and maybe Danielle can help us understand this better with the algorithms. Today, the communities are tied up by the algorithms. So it's very difficult for you to escape a community. The challenges that we have today are retrain people for their space of debates so that people can be able to debate at the same time that we are extinguishing all of those fires that are happening in the daily life. It's not a trivial challenge, but our strategic action here at the Setubal Foundation is to work on the training of young adults and adults and creating qualified spaces in the territories. Thank you very much, everyone. So since 2018, we had here in São Paulo some concerning data with the low trust of people and the institutions, the low personal trust, low knowledge in the capital and the state of São Paulo. And with that, we have developed a citizenship lab, a laboratory where we selected 5 municipalities where Votorantim has activities, and we created different technologies to strengthen the democratic culture in those municipalities. So the laboratory's work was concluded last year with some very interesting findings. We have reached about 2,000 people directly, and about 140,000 people in those municipalities were affected indirectly by other initiatives. We were very interested in the lessons learned, and we had very rich findings. The demand for political knowledge only increased during the pandemic, and that was the conclusion that surprised us positively. The local communities did not lose focus because of the pandemic. With all of the difficulties that the pandemic imposed to everyone, they still wanted political knowledge. So we had a lot of engagement, especially from the youth in all the municipalities. So this first wave of the Citizenship Lab was concluded at the end of last year, and we're going now to the second lab with an expansion in municipalities. Today, we're going to cover 14 municipalities all over Brazil throughout the whole year. This is not an electoral year, so we can work in a better way. So the Citizenship Lab was a big product of our citizenship program here at Votorantim. All companies enjoyed this experience, and they are now rehiring the Citizenship Lab for the second wave. We also had online events last year. We did a survey on voting for the municipal elections, and our focus now as a company that is dealing recently with this ecosystem of organizations that work on citizenship and democracy, our focus is going to be these new 14 municipalities and working with the organizations that we have identified in the ecosystem, including Setubal Foundation and many others, to see how we can help and potentialize the reach and the impact of all of the initiatives. We start from an understanding here at the Citizenship Lab that the democratic system of Brazil is producing low political culture. The result of this system is being low democratic and political culture. Our view here in the Citizenship Lab is to understand the causes of this low political culture and to understand why the individuals trust each other very little and trust the institutions too little. They are very little interested in politics. And then we can enter the topic of the roundtable. When we talk about values and democratic principles, thinking about freedom of expression, it, what comes to mind is tolerance and intolerance, and especially the complexity of this problem. Why people do not respect the rights of the others when they manifest. Why social media has to be this environment that allows anything, as Justice Alexandre de Moraes said in the morning. This is something that we're trying to analyze systemically. What are the root causes of such a complex problem? Marcio mentioned here redemocratizing institutions and the asymmetry in public debate. Certainly, there are several factors related to this. It is a complex issue that needs to be analyzed systemically. The pandemic is going to worsen this situation, and it's going to heighten this public debate, of course. The access to information and the access to the public space and to the public debate, of course, was affected by the coronavirus pandemic. This year, to investigate in a better way the possible causes of this result that is being produced by the system, we are doing some interactions with the other organizations in the ecosystem so that we can create a systemic map. We have experts here in Brazil assisting us in this project. The Technology and Equity Institute is with us, helping us think systemically, and we are doing an outreach of organizations so that we can discuss and study throughout the year and try to fill out this map and see the weight of each factor. Could cultural initiatives foster more trust among people? If people have more trust towards each other, are they more relevant regarding the other's opinions? The social cooperation initiatives, how can they affect the public debate when people interact more? Is respect, is tolerance affected somehow? So these are all answers that we want to discuss, and we want to try to reach a solution until the end of the year. The context of the pandemic, we haven't solved that yet. We have this pandemic that is affecting all over the country, worsening social problems. In the world, we could see a recession. It's not only in Brazil. We have a democratic recession in the whole world. There are more countries moving away from democratic values than moving closer to democratic values. The event in the United States needs to be analyzed. What Trump's defeat implies, what does it mean for this context of low democracy in the world? And the challenge for the next year is going to be a polarized environment, social media that contribute a lot to the issue of freedom of expression and to the abuse of freedom of expression. This is something that needs to be studied. It needs to be better understood by everyone. Social media, on one hand, have a fundamental role, especially in terms of social isolation. They keep people connected. And the business model of social media lives off of likes, sharings, followers. It lives off of profiles that generate this kind of adhesion. So this has to be understood, and we have to understand how this fits into a democratic environment, which is what everybody wants. A communication means that has this kind of characteristics can converse with democratic values. And that is the biggest challenge, to find out how. This is what I would like to say here, and I'm at your disposal for the questions. Thank you, Mauricio. It is interesting that Marcio already reinforced the importance of thinking about inequalities and asymmetries. Mauricio mentioned the democratic culture and how the third sector has worked on programs such as the Citizenship Lab. And I'm going to invite Thomas Traumann, a very experienced journalist. Once again, Traumann, welcome, and please feel free to do your intervention. But I would just like to bring another point that the Justice de Moraes mentioned in the morning. It's a controversial point that could help us think. He said that the companies that consider themselves technology companies today, they must start being considered media companies. And that will bring a series of other responsibilities to them. in the strategies to fight against disinformation, hate speech, and things of this kind. So I think this is an interesting point that we should put here for discussion, but the floor is yours. Thank you once again, Thomas. Thank you, Amaro. Thank you, Marcio. Great speech. Thank you, Maurício. I'm going to listen to Danielle in a second, but I would like to start by mentioning the political aspect. Politics and lies walk hand in hand. All political campaigns use lies. The first political campaign was walking around the United States, Thomas Jefferson saying that he was alive and he could prove that he was alive because there were rumors that he died. So Brazil had a historical moment in 1945 with the election where Brigadier Eduardo Gomes had his campaign distorted. He said that he was against the group that supported General Dutra, and people said that the brigadier didn't like the poor people because the poor people were were supporting his opponent. General Dutra would have won that election anyway, with or without the support of poor people, but this was a clear case of fake news that changed a lot the history of that first election right after the Vargas dictatorship in the first democratic period that Brazil had. So lies are part of the politics. What we see today is the capacity of disseminating lies. It's as if we would say, Wednesday evening, it's raining, and we don't know what would happen. And then you start flowing around. And from 2016, 15, and 16, we don't know where things are going. Marco was mentioning how can we create a new legal framework? How can we create a new regulation? When the internet framework, legal framework was created, Brazil was in the avant-garde of internet regulation. And today it is clearly outdated. But it's much more than that. It's how we can keep things within the legal framework. So the legal framework is not only for us to be able to have elections, fair elections with access to information, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of DAPP. DAPP started with a public policy board, and we quickly see how public policies are perceived. You can do surveys for that, you can do polls for that. But we decided at DAPP to see how politics were perceived in social media. We were wondering what people were thinking at that time, what people were talking when it comes to the increase in bus fare. People were supporting marches. So it was fascinating in social media to see how this knowledge was disseminated and how it was consolidated. In 2016, it was the biggest moment for me. Facebook, which was the biggest platform, the biggest arena. It was a lot more open than today. You could have access to how this knowledge was disseminated. In 2013, there was a very influential campaign called Brazil No Corrupt. And it was very important in 2000. Afterwards, they figured out that this page of this campaign was the work of a federal representative who is the son of the president of the country. So that page was linked to the page of Representative Flávio Bolsonaro. So we could find that. In 2016, Facebook started closing up. I love Twitter, but Twitter is just the tip of the iceberg. It's about 2%. When we do studies, and I think our studies are great, they're talking about the tip of the iceberg. And in 2018, we had a change that is very important with Bolsonarism. I'm not going to say if Bolsonaro is good or bad, but I'm just talking about as a tool. When Facebook and Twitter decided to cancel Trump's accounts, he had to come back to the television, to the old media, to talk to his followers again. Today we had here in Brazil this crazy change that is WhatsApp. It is able to disseminate more logically. It's not like a virus. So we may be able to track hate speech in Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. What is really influencing people ends up being WhatsApp, maybe Telegram in the future. That is where the battle is happening. I think our big problem today regarding the pandemic is the institutional disinformation. This is not a joke. People are investing money in that to create well done cards showing how vaccines kill and how this physician is the owner of a mask factory and how the Chinese created a laboratory. So there is a product, an anti-science product. This is something criminal. Politicians lie. But when the pandemic happens, I usually say that it is over my limit. What we are really seeing is professional disinformation happening dramatically. Well edited so that people do not wear masks, do not social distance, refuse the vaccines. This is real. We notice that society does not trust itself anymore. That is what is happening. They don't mind their neighbors. They don't mind if they're going to contaminate their neighbors if they're coughing in an elevator. They only care about their families and themselves. And there's a very clear situation after Twitter's decision. President Bolsonaro started migrating to Telegram. Today he has 480,000 followers on Telegram. There's a very interesting and intelligent logics. Telegram does not allow small groups like WhatsApp. Telegram has a leader that guides the others. It's the same logics. You post what you believe. That may access 1 million people or 10 million people. It's like a chain technique. We who work at DAPP find it very frustrating. You have a little bit of an experience when you see something that will become viral, but we cannot establish that for sure. It's our scientific feeling. If there is a piece of news that says that Drauzio Varela, a famous physician here, is the owner of an ultrasound company, like I said yesterday, we don't know if that is going to catch on or not, if that is going to be viral or not. They say Drauzio Varela is the owner of a lot of things. They say that he's the owner of a hospital, a chain of hospitals, mask factory. But this logic is concerning. One challenge is how we can create standards that are long lasting. And once again, you have to pay the cognitive toll, as Marcio said. When you repost something, is it going to hurt someone? That's what we have to think. You are hurting the rights of other people because they have a different stance, different political opinion, different race. And another issue is related to social status. The way that each person acts. And to finish, I'm going to get what Amaro said regarding what Justice Alexandre de Moraes mentioned. The only way to solve this problem is someone has to be held accountable. In 2018, we had a different situation. In 2020, it wasn't different. Even though we saw smaller groups and WhatsApp being having the new rules that is promoting guidelines, different guidelines. WhatsApp may not reveal the content of the conversations, but it may reveal the track flow of the messages exchanged. So it is up to us to accept the new rules of WhatsApp. The drama is Facebook is trying to create new standards as well, new rules as well. We are going to create new kinds of rules, but Facebook is not responsible for the rules. We're just going to inform that that happened, but this is not a responsibility. That's basically what Facebook is saying. I don't have any hopeful message here. I'm very skeptical about our problems, but I think the more we debate, the more we are able to find solutions. And I hope that Danielle finds more solutions than I did. Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to pass the floor to Danielle, our colleague here at DAPP. She's one of the co authors of the next study that is being prepared. So, Danielle, if you can talk about this next study and you can talk about the challenges that you have found from the research standpoint on how to approach and how to understand this phenomenon, that is going to be very, very good for us. Thank you very much, Danielle. Go ahead. Thank you, Amaro. Thank you all. Thank you, Amaro, for the invitation, for the opportunity to speak, and for all of the colleagues here for being here today with this roundtable, at this roundtable with me. As everybody said very well here in this afternoon, it is very hard to understand and create mechanisms to fight against this kind of action. As Amaro said, I'm part of a research group within this project called Digitalization and Democracy in Brazil, and our focus is to try to understand the context of the hate speech and the specificities of the online context, because there are more difficulties when we approach this issue in the online context. The main opinion that I would like to bring to you today is that it is an extremely hard task to define what is hate speech, even though we have a very vast literature, and even though we have surveys carried out by Internet Lab and Safer Lab, it is very hard to understand what is hate speech, because there's a very big difference between the definition of the concept in the academic environment, in the sociological environment, or in law, and even in legislative environments, and the classification of what is hate speech, the determination of what is hate speech from a real occurrence. The definition is in the field of ideas, and we can get to this definition of what is hate and what is hate speech even online. It is very hard to make it concrete when we try to observe it in concrete situations. When we think about online environments, it is connected to the use of figures of speech, the use of memes, irony, and the context itself. One of the things that we tried to use in our survey, and we saw that it wouldn't work, is an analysis that was carried out by some researchers in Portugal on hate speech. There is this characterization of what are hate speech messages in Portugal. We looked at the data set and we understood that it wouldn't be applicable in Brazil. There are different cultures, there are different ways to express themselves, especially when it comes to ambiguity and irony. So we would have to build our own data set, our own data that would be part of the Brazilian reality. So within this online environment, we still have to deal with two specificities of digital measures: the anonymity and the invisibility. The anonymity causes difficulties because we have, as researchers, and the platforms have trouble detecting the assaulter. The invisibility makes the speech easier to be made effective and also more difficult to be perceived, since the effects of the speech in the victim are difficult to be detected. In the offline world, in the real world, this speech, if it were extremely violent, we would see a person being assaulted or someone manifesting against a group or against an individual. In the online environment, the effect on the individuals is more difficult to be perceived. So it's also interesting to notice that one point that was mentioned in all speeches of all colleagues is the debate that says that hate speech is always connected to the idea of freedom of expression. Freedom of expression will be the other side of the coin of hate speech, and we have detected this the whole time in our data. In social media, it is very hard to validate what is this hate speech because freedom of expression is a value found in all disclaimers of all platforms. It is something that is very important for the platforms, the freedom of expression and the non prohibition of the freedom of expression. In this study, we have identified posts on Twitter and on Facebook, which are the most used platforms in Brazil, even though there are singularities to each platform. They have close dynamics, like they're always in text. For our analysis, it would be interesting to focus on something that would be more similar at that moment. And we observed the policies of the platforms regarding hate speech. Facebook defines hate speech as a direct attack to people based on protected characteristics, as they call it. Any hate speech against race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, caste, gender, sex, gender identity, severe disability, or disease. This is considered hate speech on Facebook. And on Twitter, there are prohibited behavioral rules in the platform. Policies against glorification of violence, against propagation of hate, and against violent threats. There's a disclaimer of what Twitter understands that each one of them means. So there are many descriptions on what would be hate speech from these platforms. What we saw was the difficulty that these platforms have in detailing the sanctions they apply to the users when they witness this speech. In the case of Facebook, for example, Facebook informs that they analyze the severity regarding the messages that were posted, the history of the user, and the platform makes a decision regarding the intention of the user. So we have another hard to measure element there, which is the intention of that message. That is extremely complicated. And on Twitter, they take into account the history of the user in the platform, indicating that on the first infraction they remove the content and they temporarily interrupt the account. And if they insist, the account is definitively interrupted and suspended.
Also, this suspension, this is very vague and it's not very explicit for the understanding of everything. And that is very much connected with the message of the platforms of not having the intention of hurting the freedom of expression. So this is a reality that is always present. And our research studies was studying this debate, what we were understanding as hate speech. We have reported some of the offenses, and we are going to categorize them. But at this moment, we are concentrating about this debate on hate speech. And the episode about Carrefour, where a consumer was beaten up by by security guards in Rio Grande do Sul that initiated many debates on racism and the importance of talking about that, of raising awareness about that. Some of the people were criticizing the supermarket chain and taking stances against this act. Another episode that was very important for this debate of what people are understanding about hate was the harassment suffered by Isa Pena. It was a case of misogyny. She was a representative in São Paulo, and there was this debate on the importance of being informed about this topic, that this topic should be debated more and more. On the other hand, the debates on censorship and freedom of expression, they are very much connected to the invasion of Capitolio and also around the Trump engagement and the suspension of his accounts on social media. So there's a debate about censorship on the platforms. Because the idea of the platforms is always to respect the freedom of expression. So in this moment, that was the map that we were able to create. We were able to map offenses, for instance, in the case of homophobic posts. There was this news report that had that quoted the ex mayor Marcelo Crivella in Rio de Janeiro, and he called Doria, the government of São Paulo, he called him a fag because he was talking about the money that was sent to the health centers, and they used the money to pay the suppliers and not the physicians and nurses. And then he curses João Doria using these terms, and he is accused by people on media of being homophobic and using this kind of word to call him names. So this is a study that we are going to improve because it needs this improvement. It needs us to classify all of the data, that we understand the behavior of what is considered an offense for the users and how this is being considered by the platform so that we can do something more concrete. So what I'm showing to you today is not very encouraging, but I would like to show you how hard it is to work with this topic and how much effort we are doing to get to better results. I believe that we are going to have concrete results to be closer to this debate, but this debate is far from being over. Thank you, Dani. I'm going to bring another question here. Observing what was discussed by the four guests, it would be interesting to delve deeper, especially using what Danielle just said concerning the environment that is created in this digital space on social media, for instance, where many times this is characterized by a toxic environment for groups who feel violated and helpless in their online activities and susceptible to this kind of aggressions, either in known platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, but also in closer platforms that are more closed, where the anonymity is more preserved. So in this kind of places, the aggressions, they are out of proportion. And this has the effect of sending people away from these spaces. So when we observe the digital environment as a space for public debates and people are excluded from this space, this has to do with what Marcio just commented about the uh, asymmetries and inequalities. So, what is the risk that we see in the creation of this falsification of this idea of a country? Something that Marcio also mentioned. And on the other hand, not just to mention the negative aspect, the dystopic aspect of the internet, it also enables many possibilities of digital activism. People who are able to find ways of building new movements, collective actions that can bring for the public debate demands that in another way were not being debated. They were hidden or they were silenced. So if you want to talk about that, because I believe that this question has to do with what Marcio said and also what Danielle said. So I wanted to listen from you about this issue of sending people away, since this space is becoming more and more violent for many people. And on the other hand, what are the possibilities that the digital environment is bringing for the digital activism, for making visible agendas that in any other way wouldn't be heard? Marcio was the first to speak in the first round, so maybe we could start with Danielle. Okay. I think that, yes, this debate on toxicity is very present in the analysis of hate speech. But empirically speaking, what it notice is a polarization, where you have this discourse that is considered homophobic. I'm talking explicitly about this statement by Marcelo Crivella, the former mayor in Rio. We have groups that defend them, saying that the left wing is always complaining and so on. So groups that we could say that are more in line with these offensive speeches in this environment, they polarize with groups who are defending the need for the debate. Those who are then criticizing this kind of abuse online. So we have this polarized debate online. And in this point, I think that when it's in the field of ideas and debates, when we are not seeing the practice of violence itself, I agree with what Marcio just said. He said in the beginning of his speech that we need this mediatic and digital literacy. The more people understand how this environment work, how these environments work, the vocabulary that they should use on one hand and the other, it is possible that we can reach consensus. But what we notice is that that could send people away, but they are not all leaving. I agree with Danielle. Pandemic is making that even stronger. In the end of the 90s, in the beginning of the 2000s, I defended anarchy, so we went to the streets. That was the environment, and we historically lost that through the 2000s, the first decade and the second decade, and the pandemic made it worse. So the classical spaces for political training, they disappeared. The unions, all these spaces, they eroded, they ended, and we were not even able to understand what are the new spaces to be formed politically. So the great challenge is that it seems that it was all transferred to social media. That's why we have to understand if it's the public square or not. Because during the pandemic, we are not able to go to places. So to us, in the beginning of the 2000s, the internet was the place. There were no limits for social movements. We said to ourselves, finally, we are going to have this world movement. We are going to have this international movement that is going to be very powerful. But in reality, what we see is the opposite movement. Today, I believe in the face to face meetings much more on the streets and so on than the meetings on social media. Because, as Maurício has said, the social media are private rooms, private spaces where there are private rules, private interests, and Danielle could talk more about that because we are very much restricted to the algorithm. It's a tool that enables us to reach out and find many people, but we are within this bubble. For instance, we are able to see the bubble very clearly and how much they are not they do not overlap us from Setubal Foundation. When we create this guideline for communicating causes, we had to understand how we could dialogue with people in those environments where the dialogue was not working. But we noticed that it's not only the message, because the message is not able to escape our bubble and enter the next bubble. And when it happens in the terms of the next bubble. When we see Bolsonaro supporters talking about human rights, they are talking about human rights from their own standpoint. So the information left our bubble, it entered there, it's circulating in that bubble in their own terms. So today, I'm going to be honest, I believe much more in the Brazilian funk where the young adults are meeting, even coming from different communities in terms of morality, the saraus, the slums, everywhere at this young culture is happening are the spaces that we can read as spaces for political political education. We have to understand what is the role and capillarity of the evangelical churches in different territories. We cannot see these spaces as a space of only of conservative people and right-wing people. So this is the mistake that we are making right now. I don't know if I'm optimistic or pessimistic, but today I'm doubtful if we are going to change the world using social media. Traumann, would you like to speak? No? I have another question that came from one of the viewers, Euler. Euler brought this question. How do you see the role of Congress members in these networks of disseminating hate speech, violent speech? So this is a very up-to-date topic. In Brazil, we've had this very recent case when a congressman was arrested due to his words on the YouTube. We had the American election where the president was suspended. His content was tagged as suspicious or false, Of course, we have many issues around that, but to summarize, this is a phenomenon that is very complex, and today it's on the order of the day. We have been talking about disinformation, fake news, fake profiles, robots. How can we deal with that when disinformation and hate speech, either against institutions, people, groups, is coming from public figures? In this case, it's not something that is anonymous. You don't see the robots working in an automated way. You're seeing those people exercising their power to speak in these digital spaces. I don't know if Traumann and Maurício would like to speak about that. Traumann, I think this is connected to what you said, right? I think this is something interesting because the idea of the parliamentary immunity is to protect the Congress member from being punished by the king, so to speak. You could be someone from the opposition, but being a Congress member, you're safe. There's a safe space where you could criticize and defend your causes and so on. This is undeniable. And this is key for any minority to have a Congress member or other representative, city councilor that could defend their electors in a candid way, in a clear way. This is key. Even if they won't be heard, they have the rights to the right to speak. But the issue is that this is mixed with something else. I'm going to give you an example. Last week, the president has something that I believe that is correct, that is to have this weekly live streaming, talking about the good things, and sometimes he's angry, and this is very amusing. But sometimes he invents stories about his mother, for instance. His mother, who is 96, she got a vaccine shot, and not to admit that she received the coronavac vaccine, he invents that she had been vaccinated with the Oxford vaccine, but that the health professional ripped her vaccination card and gave another one that was false. So I keep imagining that what could happen to this guy, because what the president said was that this health professional committed a fraud against his mother. So this person could suffer violence because of that, and that shocked me. If he wants to lie about his mother, I don't care. This is not my problem. But when he's involving someone else, it's something more serious because he's putting someone in danger. The issue about what Danielle Silveira said, that he doesn't believe in the divisions of powers, this is his problem. But when he says that he's going to beat up the justice in the Supreme Court, this is something different. You see clear threats, physical threats against the justices. So the legal framework that we have is not working anymore. The legal framework for defending ideas it shouldn't work for that. It should work for defending people from, if he wants to say, I want all the justice to be ousted, maybe he could say something like that. that he didn't believe that they should stay until they retire. They should, if he wanted to defend a mandate, that's okay. But when you're threatening someone, you're crossing a line, a line in our civilization, and our limits are becoming blurred. We are in this very tense moment. People, things that we thought that were very clear and obvious in the last years, we we didn't debate about democracy. The democracy was given. It was something that was unanimous. But now people are debating that. So maybe now people are debating about the electoral results. Maybe they want to accept the results. It's such a stressful situation that we have to create rules to tell what is acceptable and what is not. And that would include revising the limits. That could happen. There's another question here, going back to what Maurício just said about the democratic culture. I think this is an important topic, especially for civil society in general. Of course, there's the role of education, and this is another discussion that is also very complex. We have digital media nowadays, but let's not delve into that. What is the possible work of civil society in the field, in this field, in the sense of promoting this democratic culture? And also, how hard it is to convey to people these initiatives and this moment that we are able to see a trend of fragmentation in the digital space in several fields that are not necessarily talking to each other. So it's hard to convey the message to them due to bubbles, due to inequalities, also due to different speeches that are preventing people from talking in this common space. So as the most well-known platforms are taking action in a more incisive way in order to curb disinformation and hate speech, there's also this trend of these groups to go to spaces that are less visible. For instance, Traumann has given the example of Telegram. There's clearly this movement towards Telegram. So the question would be, how could we see this issue of conveying the message to people, for them to know about initiatives that are coming from the civil society, NGOs, third sector, citizenship movements that are aiming to work with this topic and are finding these difficulties of making their work visible and consumed, so to speak. I think that the core point of what you just said, Amaro, is the structural character of the democratic culture in Brazil. I think that the adhesion of individuals to democratic values, especially tolerance and the disposition to dialogue, is generating this kind of behavior, this kind of strangeness. So for you to reach an individual, you have to overcome this first barrier, because you're talking about something that is different from my news feed. So I don't believe you. you're evil. So this is the first difficulty. As a company, that example that I've given, that experience that came from the Citizenship Lab with practical experiences when Votorantim companies were behind the interventions that we were able to take to municipalities. The surprise was that there was no resistance. I'm sure that the Tigis Setubal Foundation also is facing that, and all the NGOs and all the third sector that is facing this topic. The need to have a very transparent approach. Positivo, one of our partners, they come with transparency. They show that tolerance is bringing this notion of limits. There's no infinite tolerance. I'm not going to tolerate something that is harming in me, is hurting me. And people don't know about that, so they come with this preconceived idea of freedom of expression as if it was something that is whole. So when we interacted with the young people about the duties and the rights, it was very well accepted because they didn't have access to that. So now they understand that they have duties and they have the rights. It's not something that is in their daily lives. It's not something that they are learning from their news feeds. So trying to answer objectively, the difficulty is to overcome this barrier of preconceived ideas. Social media today, especially those which are generating these polarizing discussions, they are opinion spaces. Nobody is taking facts. It's not a journalistic space. They are debating subjective issues, and to the point of exhausting their batteries, their data plans. So when we are giving infinite data plans for people, instead of access to educational contents about democratic values, maybe they are using that for fighting more and more on social media. We should study that. So when we're trying to find a balance on social media, in our experience from the labs in the municipalities, the role of social media and WhatsApp was paramount for the success. Everyone was at home, the schools were closed, everyone was isolated. The young adults in these municipalities were able to interact using social media. They created groups, different platforms on the internet to discuss the democratic culture within the municipalities. So it's undeniable that this tool is enabling this communication in society. And the presence of politicians and authorities on social media is something given. And I understand, I'm not an expert, but I've been studying and I understand that this is an advance in the lines of what Marcio has commented about making the institutions more democratic. If you're able to see your congressman speaking on social media, this is a positive aspect. But the challenge that was brought by Danielle to think about mechanisms of combat, this is something huge because you cannot remove that from representatives. They are Congress members or they are representatives that are representing someone. So removing their access to social media is not the most democratic way. But what kind of combat mechanism could we do? Could we use? Wouldn't it be better to work in raising awareness of citizens so that people can have this moral filter on democratic norms and values? So, this discourse is crossing a line of being civil. So this is a huge challenge, but there's this uh, bright side and this dark side in this environment. We're coming closer to the end. I believe we should have this final round of different considerations. And you could use Thomas's ideas, because one of the topics should be the printed vote versus the electronic vote. So looking ahead, what do you understand, since we're talking about 2022, what should be a issue that we should debate in the next months? That we should debate and we should use for guiding the work of those working with democracy. So let's start with Danielle, and then I'm going to give the floor to Maurício and Marcio to close. That was a hard question, Amaro. I think that this project is key because it tries to map exactly that, as we have our group for mapping hate speech. There's another group that is mapping disinformation, and I believe that this other group will have a lot of work to try and understand all the messages concerning misinformation on electronic vote, electronic ballot box, and the creation and generation of mistrust in the population. I think this is the issue. When something that is given starts to be considered suspicious or starts being questioned, it seems that everything could be questioned. If we start questioning if the vaccine is efficient, if it's worthwhile to get a vaccine, it seems that everything could be questioned. So I believe that we should be very cautious. Scholars, intellectuals, journalists, and serious politicians, they have a lot of work to do in trying to fight that somehow. Giving examples, clarifying more and more the population concerning this topic. But I believe this is a hard work. I cannot answer what you've just asked, but I believe that we have a lot to do. Thomas? This is a very broad question. I'll try to be brief. We have two times. One is the political time. I believe that we are going to see many votings in the Congress. There's this activism in the Congress, and in the past they were not able to vote as they used to vote. So this year we are going to see many votings. We're talking about polarizing topics, about, for instance, regulating land on the Amazon, and also the settlings, and also the fiscal adjustments, with very complex topics in terms of the minimum wages being linked to the expenses of healthcare and education. So within the Congress, this is going to be a very controversial year. But at the same time, we could be talking face to face, but we're debating on Zoom because we are limited due to the pandemic. So I believe that 2022 will be a different time. The worst scenario is that we are going to have at the end of the year around 100 million people vaccinated. That is not a lot, but mostly most of everyone who is over 60, and next year until June we will be able to get the other. So we're going to be back to normality. That we deserved that, and let's think about that. So we will try and continue to debate on the networks, and that's why they are so important, the platforms right now. And next year we are going to be able to debate face to face. So it's going to be something interesting to see. Because people are certain that they should have gone to the streets to manifest against, to demonstrate also against this or that, but they were locked due to the pandemic. They had to take care of themselves. Even when they go to work, they have to observe the distance and so on. But let's see this bright side, as Mauricio mentioned. I think that next year is going to be an year of something very vibrant. Thank you, Traumann. Mauricio? I'm, as Thomas and Danielle just said, well, I'll try to look at another angle, not to be so repetitive. But I think that we are going to test the resilience of our institutions. From now on, and more, the institutions will have to show how much they are able to resist attacks and the way they react. It's not, they shouldn't react in a way that is not democratic, because this is not good. So we are in this environment of low institutionality. So that's the democratic aspect that the surveys have shown. And just to wrap up with this positive view, I think that we should learn from what's happening. Many things happened in the last months, and we can learn from that. We can learn from the experience in the United States, what they experienced there in the American society. So let's see what is our level of awareness to be able to observe this kind of things. All right, thank you, Mauricio. Marcio? Since I'm the last, I'm going to be creative, okay? I believe that we are going to see a lot of fake news. I think that Traumann is right. The ballot box is going to be a topic that is going to be debated. Bolsonaro has been talking about since 2018. He said, I won, but I've seen fraud. If he won, he was saying that there was fraud, imagine if he lost. So other fake news are going to emerge. So we are very much concerned for 2022. I'm optimistic beyond 2022. I think that being re-elected or not, I think that this Bolsonarism came to stay. This mindset of Bolsonarism came to stay. It's something that we are going to fight for a long time. So it's urgent for us to take this figure from this place, but of course he's going to operate even not in the presidency. So I have hope for 2022. I don't know if we will be able to overthrow, to take him from office, so to speak, but I don't know if there's something to replace him that is much better. But something else that is concerning me is this flexible access to weapons. It's something that I didn't take serious 4 years ago when we went to a bar. We were talking about this concept about this low-cost terrorism. the low cost terrorism is how do I do to mobilize feelings and affections of people so that they can fulfill an action. So instead of implementing at this terrorist this terror cell, I'm going to inflate people to the point that they are going to practice violence, either by beating up someone in the streets or practicing a violent act, or what happened in the Capitolion. You had a group of people that could be considered a group of terrorists, but it was not a cell. It's something that happened. I'm very much afraid of what could happen from now until next year, depending on this stance. If the political leaderships are not taking a stance and the institutions are not taking actions to block this kind of speeches like the one by Danielle Silveira, I'm afraid that we can have violent acts happening from now until the election of next year. Something similar to what happened in the United States. If Bolsonaro keeps speaking about those terrible things that he talks about. I think this is the real terror because people are really purchasing weapons. Okay, thank you, Marcio. Thank you, everyone, one more time. We are going to close the event Elections 2022, Disinformation in Brazil, organized by the Directorship of Analysis and Public Policies, FGV DAPP, with the support of the German Embassy in Brazil in this project called Digital Democracy and the Digitalization of the Public Sphere in Brazil. You may follow FGV DAPP on social media to follow up the production concerning this project and this great debate aiming the next year. Thank you one more time. Have a good afternoon.